Hello, and welcome to this event, the launching of the Nordic Economic Policy Review 2026, Advancing Policy Through Randomized Experiments. Welcome to all of you here. Welcome to the people who are following us online through the stream. My name is Torbjørn Røe Isaksen. I'm the political editor of E24, a business news site. We'll have a very interesting and full program today. Just a few practical details first. Emergency exits are where you came in. Apart from that, there's no escape, so walk that way. There are restrooms here to my right and outside. We'll start off right away with the first opening remarks by the Minister of Research and Higher Education in Norway, Sigrun Aasland. So please give her a warm applause.
Thank you, Torbjørn. Thank you, everyone, for inviting and for organizing this extremely interesting event. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today, being part of the launch of this journal, Nordic Economic Policy Reviews on Advancing Policy Through Randomized Experiments. There are many similarities across the Nordic countries, but also perhaps surprisingly many important differences. And Nordic collaboration is at the core of Norwegian and Nordic research policy, because we are small nations, one by one, but we are the 11th biggest economy in the world when we put our efforts together. And to learn from how other countries that are similar but different from our own, and design and implement and evaluate policy reforms in these countries is important. The shared platform for policy-oriented research implemented in this journal on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers and Norwegio is therefore extremely valuable to us. Modern policy making is not easy. Policymaking and good public administration should be based on reliable knowledge. And I think this goes without saying. Who could possibly disagree on such a statement that we should base policies on knowledge? Not many, at least not many in this very peaceful corner of the world, in the sensible Nordic political discourse. How to do this, however, is less straightforward. Because policymaking is about people. And to be effective, public policy must therefore understand the complexities of human nature and the choices that we all make. And we do not live in labs or on the average, and we cannot necessarily be tested in labs. This is why randomized experiments is such an interesting approach and possibility to give us a real understanding of cause and effects, also on a societal level. And that is today a Nordic Economic Policy Review's topic of the day. It's a highly interesting topic for policymakers and everyone interested in building better societies. And it is also sometimes controversial. The Norwegian tax experiment that Simen Markussen will present later has been subject to both political and academic debates in Norway. I will not present the study. You can look forward to that afterwards, but just say this: labor, participation in the workforce, and thereby people, our main research, our most scarce assets, is also our most valuable assets. And it is a great paradox in Norway, as in other countries, that we have a number of skills shortages in society on the one hand, and far too many people outside of labor and education on the other. In Norway, about 100,000 people under 30 are so-called youth not in employment, education, or training. They are NEETs. And this is something we have to address. This is something that is at the core of everything else that we want to achieve, to have access to the necessary workforce and competence on the one hand, and to reduce NEETs and people outside on the other. It is therefore one example of where randomized experiments can be of potentially great value to our society, to provide more informed policymaking, and to address some of the greatest challenges of our times. And therefore, we have also asked some of our best minds to try and do that and give us some answers as to what are the effects of tax deductions and tax policies on workforce participation. Taking randomized trials from the lab to society meets some legal and ethical challenges, practical constraints, and sparks legitimate academic debates, and some debates perhaps that are less knowledge-based than others. But this is also why it's important to build competence structures and maybe most importantly, trust over time. It is also why the Ministry of Education and Research now contributes to the funding of the new advisory unit for randomized trials at Statistics Norway. We are working to strengthen the sharing and use of data across the education and research sectors to support better knowledge-based policy development, and we are establishing new registries now for children in preschools and schools. Over time, these new data will significantly improve the conditions for generating robust knowledge about the effects of policies targeting children and young people, and I think we owe them that. To succeed in knowledge-based policy development, we need independent academic research, we need strong and constructive interaction between research and public administration, we need access to high-quality data, and we need political willingness to learn, including when the answers are more uncertain than we might wish, or even worse, when the answers are the opposite of what we had perhaps thought or hoped for. The Nordic countries are particularly well placed in this regard, with high levels of trust, strong public institutions, and high-quality administrative register data. And this special issue of the journal is an important contribution in that direction and towards greater Nordic collaboration in research and research-based policy making. As the introduction reminds us, politics cannot be reduced to research, but policymaking benefits always from better knowledge. So thank you to the Nordic Council of Ministers and to Nordregio for organizing this event of great importance, and thank you to all the contributors who share their experiences with conducting randomized policy experiments in the Nordic region. And I look forward to hearing more about the results. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And now we'll hear from the Secretary General of the Nordic Council, Karen Ellemann. Please, give her a warm applause.
Thank you so much. And first and foremost, thank you, Minister Aasland, for welcoming and also for hosting this launch event today here in Oslo. And then, yes, of course, on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers, I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to the official launch of our 2026 Nordic Economic Policy Review. And I might be repeating a bit of what the Minister has been saying, but it's okay to get it from different mouths here. So dear Nordic friends, that's important. And also maybe just highlighting that when we meet here today, we meet actually in a moment that is indeed shaped by war in Europe, geopolitical tensions, increased economic uncertainty, and really large disruptions in the global economic and political landscape. And for our small open economies, like we have here in the Nordics, these developments are not just some distant headlines. I mean, they affect us directly, and they shape our government's daily policy choices. And at the same time, yes, we face important structural challenges here at home because our populations, they are aging. Fertility rates are declining. We are adapting to rapid technological transformations, and all of this affects both how we work, how we live, and how we produce. And the security situation requires Nordic governments to allocate large resources to defense and security purposes. And this is precisely in view of these joint challenges that strong and ambitious Nordic cooperation is indeed more important than ever. With the Nordic Prime Minister's joint vision in front, our governments unitedly, they have committed to making the Nordic region the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. 2 years ago, back in 2024, we took, I believe, a very important step forward by adopting all new cooperation programs across all our ministerial councils, committing to ambitious yet concrete political goals and priorities to actually be able to fulfill the vision and our strategic priorities. And our vision and our cooperation programs, they really provide us with a very clear direction for how the Nordic governments work together in practice, to coordinate and improve policies, to share knowledge and experience, to finance joint initiatives, all with the ambition of improving our collective strength, our prosperity, and our resilience in an uncertain and also a very competitive world. So in this context, the topic of this year's Nordic Economic Policy Review, advancing policy through randomized experiments, I think it's both timely and it's extremely important because at its core, it's about something quite simple, learning what actually works. And Nordic cooperation is built on shared value, trust, openness, and also this very, and I mean it was very emphasized by the minister, of course, this commitment to evidence-based policy making. And this really gives us a very strong and valuable direction. But sometimes more is needed to ensure that our policies deliver real positive results. So what you will see later, clearly presented in our report that is launched today, randomized experiments actually allow us to test and evaluate policies in practice, to see if they actually deliver the intended results before scaling them up. It can really help us to distinguish between what we might believe will work and what actually does work. So consider some of the challenges we face: integrating more people into our labor markets, improving education outcomes, promoting innovation and productive investments, or accelerating the green transition. I mean, in all these areas, the benefits of doing policies right and effectively from the very beginning are extremely high, not only economically, but of course also socially. And I think that, no doubt, Nordic cooperation really gives us a unique advantage here, because it gives us the opportunity to learn not only from experience within our own countries, but also to learn from each other. A policy tested in one Nordic country really can provide valuable insights for another Nordic country. So together, we can build a stronger evidence base for our policies that any one of us could do by ourselves. And in a more fragmented and competitive world, this is a kind of cooperation that really is valuable and becomes even more valuable. So true Nordic cooperation requires a continuous effort, and also that we share and learn, not only from our respective successes, there are many, luckily, but also dare to learn from our failures. It's difficult to talk about failures, but we need to do that in this trusted ambience that we have. It really requires a willingness that we sometimes challenge our own assumptions. So this is why this particular edition of the Nordic Economic Policy Review matters. It brings together research and policy in a way that is practical and forward-looking, and it highlights how experimentation can be used across different policy areas, from taxation in Norway to preschooling in Finland, and it really provides us with very concrete examples of how and when better evidence through experiments can actually lead to better policy outcomes. So ultimately, the goal is not experimentation for its own sake. The goal is, of course, better policy making, policies that actually improve people's lives, strengthen our economies, and really deliver on the challenges at hand, while, of course, at the same time upholding the values that define our Nordic region. So, dear Nordic friends, the Nordic countries have shown time and time again that by working closely together, we can achieve much more than we can do alone. And in today's world, that lesson is as relevant as ever. So by combining our shared Nordic values and common strategic direction under the Vision 2030 with a very strong commitment to learning from each other what works and what doesn't, we can continue to develop good policies that meet the challenges of our time effectively, responsibly, and also with strong confidence. So I look very much forward to the presentations and the discussions here today. Thank you all for joining, and all the best to all of us. Thank you.
Tusen takk, Karen Ellemann. We're now approaching the part where we'll dive more into the report. And I just want to let you know that we'll also later today dive into some of the dilemmas, some of the controversies, some of the debates that inevitably come when research meets policy. But first, let's get an overview presentation of the report by Rope Uusitalo, who is a professor of public economics from the University of Helsinki and also editor of this year's report. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Oslo, Secretary General Ellemann, for your kind and nice words of this report. And it's my honor to give a little sort of overview presentation before getting to the real thing presented by the authors themselves on the some of the sort of practical chapters of the report. As you all know, and can I scroll here? Okay. So Nordic Economic Policy Review is an annual publication that picks a topic or theme, one per year, that changes from waste policies to fiscal policies to hopefully defense policies. And the editor has a chance of proposing something, proposing a topic. So this year I had tried to propose picking a topic. Do I have to press again? I see it here, but I can't. Okay, so that is not going to change, but it's okay. Okay, very good. So this is okay. Very good. Thank you. So this year I was pushing for something that I believe and many others believe that is important both for practical policies, for practical policy making, and at the same time something that is so hot topic in economic research, and it's not only in economic research but in research in other social sciences. And I thought, and many others thought that I talked to, thought that talking about randomized experiments would be a timely topic that it is hot in agenda. At the time, we didn't know that Norway was about to start this massive tax experiment, but so apparently it turned out that this topic was even more timely than what we had planned a year ago we started. So why we do this? Why do we do this in research? The main reason is that whatever we do is difficult. Without experiments, there's in all research topics, there's always a big question on whether we can actually claim that something works. The treatment we are imposing people has impacts, or whether this is due to something else. There's always a major issue on selectivity, whether the group that gets treatment is fundamentally different from the group that is not getting treatment. This is always a major question that cannot be solved. Well, science has solved this a long time ago, and so the simple answer is to randomize, and by randomizing the groups to treatment and control, you can be sure that these groups are not so systematically different. There will be differences, but there will be random difference, but there will be no systematic differences. This is the whole key. After doing this, you can simply compare the averages after treatment in the control and treatment, making the sort of the evaluation of the policies simple, transparent, and often very convincing. And by making that very convincing, it's also something that may have powerful impacts in policies. However, so while evaluating this is easy, designing is difficult, and this report is a lot about how to design these policies, what the people who have been doing this in practice, what kind of challenges they have faced. Okay. There are some sort of successful high-profile cases in Nordic countries. I think the Finnish basic income experiment is certainly one. We had 2,000 people getting basic income for 2 years. Norwegian tax experiment is going to, it has already generated a lot of attention. It will do that during the next 5 years, I'm sure. Sweden has a long tradition of evaluating active labor market policies. Danes have doing so much experiments in education, and now they're writing meta-studies on their own previous studies on education. So they have very long history of that. The final one to mention here is the Finnish early education experiment. Of these, today Simon Markussen is going to talk about the Norwegian very fresh new tax experiment that's just started, and the Ramin Izari, who is here, is going to talk about Finnish early education experiment, which is already old news because it already was completed already in January this year. So we are talking about sort of recent things. The final thing I would like to say before letting the authors on stage is that we do have some sort of comparative advantage in Nordic countries, and the main one is our data. So the one of the great things about doing research in Nordics is that you can actually follow people. You can follow the people who are in preschool in Ramin's experiment, probably until they are 25 or adults, and see what happens to them later in life without calling them every year, which would obviously be pretty difficult. And the second thing I hope is that in the Nordic countries we sort of believe in evidence, and I hope this stays that way. That means that while we conduct experiments, evaluate experiments, these experiments may have impacts on real policies. Okay, but that's what we have today. So we'll hear about Norwegian tax experiment. We'll talk about Finnish early education experiment. You can read about the Swedish active labor market policy experiments, several of those in the booklet that is in front of you. You can read about the meta-study on Danish education experiments, and you read about the Finnish experiment evaluating the impacts of subsidizing the first employee in the firms. But I'll quit here, and I'll let the authors of the first two papers on the stage. Thank you.
Tusen takk. So we're going to go now to a short presentation by two article authors who are here today. Simen Markussen is a Norwegian economist and a leading figure in Nordic labor market and welfare research. He's with the Center for Economic Research, and Ramin Izadi is a Finnish economist known for his research on education policy and policy experiments. And he's a senior researcher at the VAT Institute for Economic Research. Simen, there you are. Yeah. Vær så god. Scenen er din. Applaus.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to present a chapter describing Norwegian tax experiment and describing also the work behind the experiment. I'm not going to be able to go into all details, but you can read it, of course, in this publication. And this chapter is written together with Marie Bjørneby in the Ministry of Finance. So, starting from January this year, 106,500 Norwegians aged 20 to 35, they have a different tax system than the others. And the tax system they face includes a feature which is common in many countries, but has been not introduced yet in Norway, which is at earned income tax credit. So an extra sort of deduction in the tax system for labor income and not for income from other sources. And these kind of credits, as I said, they have been used widely in many other countries, not in Norway, and it's a measure introduced in order to strengthen the incentives to take part in the labor market. These 106,500 young Norwegians, they are randomly drawn out of a population of 1.33 million, which is then the total population of taxpayers in Norway, aged 20 to 35 years. And they are chosen to receive this different tax system for 5 years. So in that sense, it's a quite massive and maybe not unprecedented, but unusually large experiment, I would say. So let me start to take sort of one step back. So why is this experiment coming? And I think there are sort of three independent, maybe not arguments, but factors that is the reason why this experiment came together. The first is the labor market. So if you go back, I'm getting old, but when I studied at the University of Oslo, early 2000s, we learned that Norway was European championships, was on the top, European champions in employment. We had more people employed than any other place in the world. Since that, we have been surpassed by the Swedes, which in itself is enough to do something about it. And also the Danes, and a few others. Employment is still high in Norway, but we are not on the top. It has sort of stagnated in a period of time where many other countries has managed to increase their employment rates. And the government do have an employment target of increasing the employment rate by roughly 2.5 percentage points. So, and employment is considered high employment is considered maybe the most important factor for securing public finances in the long run. So that's one aspect. The second is the idea of an earned income tax credit. So this is widely used in many other countries, but not in Norway. It was proposed first by the Solberg government and also by the tax commission a bit later. But it has never been implemented. And we do not know that much about its effects, but it's sort of a tempting tool to increase employment. So that's the second part. And the third is that the ambitions for conducting experiments has increased. And at least my reading of it is that it happened something during COVID. So during the pandemic, researchers have for many years been pushing towards more experiments. But during the pandemic, I think a growing frustration emerged, both among policymakers and researchers, that we knew too little about the measures that was implemented. And it was too hard to conduct experiments along the way. Many sound experiments during the pandemic was stopped for different reasons. And after the pandemic, it has been put together a group in the Norwegian ministries, across ministries, and one of the targets is to increase the use of experiments and secure more evidence-based policy. One thing that has come out of this is as a new national guidance service established in Statistics Norway to help different parts of the government to conduct experiments. That's sort of one very specific thing that has come out of this. So all these three developments came together and made it possible to do this experiment, I think. And in this chapter, we describe sort of the way from idea to reality. And of course, that involves many different actors. Many different actors within the Ministry of Finance, of course. Different sections working on different parts, tax policy, research, legislation, and more. And of course, the tax administration played a key role here, not least in implementing the experiment. And also a research group, which I'm part of, with researchers from the Frisch Center and the University of Oslo, the tax center at the University of Oslo. And not least, such a project has of course been through a large political process with a public hearing and later been decided in the budget. And in practice, it was not formally decided before just a few days before it was implemented. So everything was sort of, all the practical details was planned and worked on for months before the experiment was decided formally and then implemented actually just maybe a week after. I don't remember exactly, but something like that. All right. What does such a tax credit do? So this graph describes a stylized version of the Norwegian tax system with and without the credit. So the blue line, along the x-axis we have income in thousands of Norwegian krones, and the blue line describes how much taxes you pay in the case, for the normal case, while the red line describes it with the earned income tax credit. And then I think it makes sense to sort of to describe the intended effects for 3 or 4 different groups. So let's start with the blue part to the left, those who earn little, less than 200,000. And a large group of this earns nothing, or at least very little, do not take part in the labor market. And for them, the incentives to work 1 more hour is actually completely unchanged. But the incentives to take part in the labor market, to move from sort of not participating to take a job, increase quite a lot. So for them, what we call the participation tax rate is reduced, and quite heavily. For many of those who receives benefits, these participation tax rates can be quite high, because when you shift into the labor market, what happens is that you get earnings, but you also reduce your benefits. And the tax credit it works in such a way that it reduces participation tax rate and promotes to take part in the labor market. But then we have the red and the green zone, which is a little bit more complex, in the sense that for those who would otherwise have earned, say maybe between a bit more than 200 and 350,000, they pay less taxes, and they pay less taxes on the last hour they work. So the marginal tax rate is increased. So for them, economic theory is actually not able to say anything about whether they're going to work more or less. It's unknown. And for the green part of the line, for those earning from 350 to 650,000, economic theory is actually crystal clear. They're going to work less. Why? Because they pay less taxes, and their marginal taxes is actually increased, because the tax credit is gradually phased out. So, as you see, sort of the predicted effects of this measure is not that clear. And those who with certainty can, before this experiment has started, say that this is going to work, or this is not going to work, or it's going to be this or that, I don't know where they take that from. It's not easy to predict. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit. In the report, we describe the work behind the randomization design, etc., etc. I have to jump a little bit to tell you a bit more about the practical implementation. So, together, with the public budget this or last year, the budget for this year, you got a very unusual part, which was a code, a Python code, published together with the budget, which is actually the code for the draw. So that code was made public in advance. It contained, and it was completely open, down to a key which was not yet realized, which was the opening index of the Oslo Stock Exchange on a specific day in the future. So without that key, it's impossible to predict what the outcome of the draw. And what that code does is to split the population into small discrete groups by birth year and gender and earnings history, and then sort within these groups everyone by earnings in 2025, split them into groups of 100 persons, and within each of these cells of 100 persons, 8 persons are randomly drawn to receive the tax credit, 46 to receive some additional tax information together with the treated in group A, and group C not to receive anything at all. And I'm going to show you how this was implemented in December last year. So then, everyone in the target group received an email or an SMS saying that they were part of this experiment. And then you could log in to the tax authority's webpage. And on that webpage, you would receive some information. And what you receive depending on the outcome of the draw. So these are sort of the 3 alternatives. So those who were treated, everyone received some information about the experiment that was the same for all. Then they received information about saying that you've been randomly selected and are entitled to the work allowance, or not. And then, for those 2 groups to the left, they will also receive additional information about the tax system. And I'm going to show you, and this was done in order to, because if you just tell people that they receive an earned income tax credit, they don't know necessarily what that implies. So in order to inform about that, we try to inform everyone about their marginal tax rates on different levels. So this first here, saying that, well, if you increase your employment by 1,000 kroner, then you will pay this and this more tax, and you will receive this and this additional netto tax. So this is how much you earn. And the same for 100,000 and 300,000. And the exact same information were given to the control group in group B, just with a normal tax system, such that the numbers were different, the structure of the information were identical. All right. Then, finally, at this point, I'm not able to give you any news. I don't know anything more about the outcome of this experiment than you do. We have not received data yet. Data for employment is actually available in Norway with quite a short lag, 3 months. So we expect to receive data for the first quarter in not that long time. But right now, we don't have any data, so I'm not able to give you any updates on the outcomes that will come. But I can just want to end sort of on describing 3 different, to say, layers of outcomes that can come out of this experiment. And of course, the core is that we're going to get, I think, credible and much better information on how strong or weak are the labor supply responses to such a tax change, both on participation and on what we economists call the intensive margin, the change in hours worked. That's sort of the core outcome of this experiment. And it's large enough that we can also be able to study this for subgroups and dynamically over time, etc., and different income intervals. So it's going to give us a lot of, I think, new insight on the effects of tax policy on labor supply. In addition to that, we are also conducting surveys and going to learn about the effects of perceived taxes. And I'm also sure that it's going to be conducted a lot of research in the years to come, sort of spin-offs on this experiment, studying different income effects on various outcomes. And then finally, I think and hope that this experiment will pave the way for more experiments to come in the future. I think that will be the case. I don't know, but from talking to different local politicians, for example, and local administrations, I have heard several times that they are saying things that's almost like this, that if this finance minister, Stoltenberg, he's a quite famous person in Norway, so if he's able to do this tax experiment, then I think we are able to do this and this. Then we can at least do like this, he says. So I hope and I think that we will see more experiments, and we will, through that, get more evidence-based policy in the future. Thank you for the attention.
Tusen takk, Simen. I forgot to mention before Simen took to the stage that we actually have a Q&A session with both of you presenters. And I was going to tell you this in advance so you could prepare to ask some questions. But Simen, you have to come back up. Let's spend a couple of minutes. We do have a coffee break at 11, and we'll stick to the schedule. We'll make sure that Ramin has has enough talk as well. But if you do have a question, let me know. And for the next session as well, the next speaker, it's very awkward if we have to just sit here and stand here in silence. So prepare a few questions, please. But Simen, let me start off. This giant experiment. It's been politically controversial. And before the end of the experiment, there's an election. What happens if there's a new government and they decide everybody should have a tax credit?
Well, at that point, the experiment will have lasted for quite a long time. So I think we will be able to learn quite a lot from it regardless.
Okay. One more question. There's been also some debate about the technical design, the research design. In your opinion, what are the pitfalls? What are the weaknesses, so to speak, of the research design?
I think the main weakness is that it's the randomization is on individual level, so it will not be able. It's not well suited to capture equilibrium effects or say effects on the labor market as such. You could imagine that, say that you did this on local level, municipality level, and everyone received this in a municipality, then it would be easier to study, to remove effects of, say, the crowding out effects on employment, for example. You can imagine that if there's a fixed number of jobs, and the receivers of these tax credits are more encouraged to work, well, then they steal the jobs of others. And if you introduce it for everyone, employment is not going to increase that much. You can imagine such mechanisms, which will not be included in this experiment in that sense. And that's a drawback. It's something we have been considering and studying and try to see if it's possible to do something about. And the reason why we chose to do it this way is that we think the precision you would obtain statistically from doing it, for example, on local level instead, is too poor to actually learn much about this anyway. It's a pragmatic
Final question before Ramin can have the stage. Is it a challenge as well that the participants, they know it's time limited? So if you want to make a change, you know that in a couple of years, or when the experiment is done, your tax credit is gone, probably.
Yeah.
So why would you want to make a life-altering change, perhaps, or change your ways for a couple of years?
It's a challenge. So this was, I can illustrate it with a very simple example. A couple of years ago, a few years ago, Iceland changed their tax system. And they had 1 year with what they call a tax holiday, when they did not pay taxes at all. And of course, a lot of people then chose to quit their studies and work for a year. So they had this intertemporal change. This is part of the reason why the experiment is that long-lasting. It lasts for 5 years and not just one. And of course, you can say that 5 years is not a lifetime, but it is at least quite long.
Yeah. For maybe for research, it's not a lifetime, even for economic research.
Thank you. Not for economic research.
Thank you, Simen Markussen. And then let's welcome up to the stage. And just keep that applause going for Ramin Nisadi, who will welcome up to the stage for the last 15 minutes before we have a break. And as I mentioned, we'll also have questions at the end of this session. So please prepare.
All right, may I have the first slide? Thank you. Oh, I used myself. Look at that technology. All right, hello everybody. My name is Ramin. I'm from the Government Institute for Economic Research from Finland. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our experience in conducting a national scale RCT in Finland. So I am going to talk to you about our results, but I really want to frame this talk as more about what can we learn about policy evaluations that could be more generalizable to different contexts and different countries. So I take our RCT as a useful example of what can happen when a popular, ex-ante popular national reform is evaluated before making it permanent. And I would also like to, at least myself, I see the experiment, the success of the experiment as much as an institutional achievement as an academic one. So let's start by showing how a single line in the government program, the incoming government program of 2019, became a national RCT. So the incoming government in 2019, the Marine government, the coalition agreement, the government program had a single line that said that they want to pilot a 2-year preschool. And the purpose was to increase enrollment, to close learning gaps, and to enhance school readiness of children. Well, of course, the Ministry of Education started to work on this one sentence, how do we implement that, and they invited Aalto University to start discussing how to best implement a pilot in a research design. And eventually, they were convinced that the correct way to go about doing this would be to do a randomized evaluation, instead of what usually is done, which is, of course, just to invite volunteers to participate in a pilot and then see how the outcomes of the volunteer municipalities or daycare centers would turn out. So this time we did it a little bit different. And very soon after we had made the research proposal for the randomization, we realized together with the minister that this, of course, needs really a new temporary law behind it in order to be able to implement all the details of the experiment. And in very short order in 2020, a temporary bill was passed in the parliament, and which essentially codifies our research design. It specifies randomization, it mandates municipalities to participate, very importantly, and of course allows us for large-scale data collection as well. So in between, right after the enactment of the law, then the actual research, the actual preschool experiment started in 2021. Our first cohort entered preschool 1 year earlier. But during the experiment, a new government came in, a new coalition government. The opposition won the parliament election, they came into power. But what I view as a great institutional success was that the new government renewed its commitment to waiting for the results of this RCT before reforming the system. What followed was several years of implementation, data collection, and analysis, culminating in a final report that we left to the Ministry of Education this January. And then what is going to happen next is this summer, all the different parties are convening, have their conventions, and they are reevaluating their party programs. And what was originally, during these 5 years of implementation, reforming preschool in the way that the experiment was set up became very popular. So all but one party adopted this 2-year preschool as part of their party program. And we will see this next summer how, when they convene in their summer conventions, what happens to this one item in the party program. Will it disappear or will it stay? And you will see the results. A lot of the parties involved were quite disappointed with the results because we don't see big effects on the experiment. And if this item is removed from the program, I would view that as a great success for this experiment, despite the null results that we have. In summary, this really is an exception to the rule that policies are evaluated after the fact, but as we see in this report, many of the other RCTs, this seems to become, we hope of course in this room that it will become a continuous policy to start evaluating potential reforms that are amenable to RCTs before they are implemented nationwide. So I want this slide to basically land why we think our research design is credible for policy decision making and not only for academic publication. So our design principle in doing this RCT from the very beginning was to test the reform under the conditions that would apply if it was reformed nationally. And we did this by, I want to raise 4 points on how we did this. So first of all, of course, this is only possible because of the temporary legislation. Mandatory participation was part of it. So the legislation mandated municipalities and daycare centers that were randomized into treatment to participate in the experiment and also willingly cooperate with the data collection. And this mandate to participate is quite different from what is typically happening because we are not only learning from enthusiastic participants, those who volunteer and select into these treatments, and which are usually the ones who might have largest gains also from participating. Second, we randomized at the center level, at the most granular level possible, where the treatment is actually delivered to the children. And this enables us to really, this powers up the statistical analysis to detect even small effects. And that is very important for a policy RCT, because if we have disappointing effect, if we find zero estimates for the RCT, we want to be able to say for certain that indeed the effects are not there, instead of having a lot of statistical uncertainty around our zero effects. Third, we tried to implement it in a way that it would have been done in a national reform, so that the implementation was entirely local. So it was not research supervised or ministry supervised. Instead, basically the treatment is just that the Board of Education in Finland came up with a new curriculum a national curriculum for 5-year-olds, and then as it would be normally done, the national curriculum would then be implemented first at the municipal level and then at the daycare center level. And this is the way it would have been done in a full reform. Instead of what could have been done an alternative would have been to really micromanage and make sure that the fidelity of the program is followed in each of the daycare centers. The municipalities would be handheld through how to implement everything in order to maximize the potential of the experiment. Instead, intentionally, we wanted to have hands off and try to simulate in a way how would a national application of this or implementation of this reform work in practice. This reduces the chances of finding large effects, but it also makes this more policy informative. And finally, the dose of the treatment, in a sense, was the same as it would have been in a full rollout. So we were working with the same workforce which would be the existing workforce of teachers and daycare center staff. We worked with the same group sizes. There was decentralized retraining. We did not have a retraining program that was supervised by the research team, and there were no significant extra resources allocated to the daycare centers. And so the whole design was deliberate to test the reform under the conditions that would apply nationally. So now let me be a little bit more precise what actually changed for the children in the treatment group. So there are 3 highlights I want to pick up from here. So what changed relative to the control group? So first of all, let me show you this is kind of the control group and this is the treatment group. So the business as usual education system in Finland is so that from age 0 to 6 you would be in either in home care or some early childhood education center-based care. And then at age 6 you would go to preschool, that's the 1 mandatory year of preschool, and then you would enter primary education. For the children assigned to the treatment group, you would have, until age 5, you would have whatever your parents decided, either home care or center-based care. But starting from age 5, you would attend 2 years of preschool instead of 1 under this new national curriculum implemented at the local level. And how the municipalities in reality reacted to this reform was in 3 main ways. First of all, they hired more qualified teachers because the preschool curriculum at the national level had more demanding requirements for teachers. So they hired more qualified teachers. So treatment center staffs had more formal pedagogy training. We saw not large, but slightly more structured guided learning. So the children participating in the treatment centers at age 5, they would receive more of these guided activities. They would have an instructional morning session where they would go through letters and numbers and school preparedness that was more still play-based, but more guided and structured. And the municipalities typically reorganized 5-year-olds from mixed age child groups to more age homogeneous groups. So they would be organized with groups with their own age peers, with age 5 children, so that they could be taught in an age-appropriate environment together with other children. What didn't change was group sizes, so the group and student-teacher ratios remained the same. The overall resourcing remained similar between the treatment and control groups. So really, the trial tested extending preschool within a mature early childhood education system rather than replacing no care with care. So I present this as our main policy result. So the first policy goal of this RCT was to improve school readiness. And we chose 2 indicators before the experiment as our main school readiness indicators. One would be academic skills, and one would be index of socio-emotional skills. So we really wanted to capture more than one dimension of child development. And what you see here is an intention to treat comparison. So that is the whole treatment group is just compared against the whole control group. How much do I have? 2 minutes, okay. And we see that there is a very small effects in both skills, which by age 7, they are indistinguishable from each other, the treatment and the control group. And the large sample size here is very important. The results are not just very small, but the confidence intervals are narrow, which means that we can with certainty say that the effects cannot be very large. But this average effect hides very important differences between 2 different margins of effects. And I want to slow down here a little bit, even though I have only a few minutes left. So for most kids who respond to the treatment, the 2-year preschool replaces standard early childhood education. In fact, for 95% of kids who respond to our treatment, it replaces normal daycare. But for 5% of children who respond to the treatment, it actually replaces home care. And those are 2 very different counterfactuals, so they answer different questions. And the question becomes not does preschool work, but it is compared to what and for whom. And here with modern econometric methods, we can actually distinguish between the 2 questions. So here you see the effect on the children for whom it replaced daycare. And that's the very small effects that we observed in the average effect. But then this is the effect for children for whom it replaced home care. And right after the treatment, so the extra year of preschool, we actually see very large increases in their academic skills and their socio-emotional skills. But despite that, by age 7, with the start of primary education, the control group has caught up and the effects mostly disappear. Although with this group, being so small, we can't quite certainly say whether it's 0 or not. The punchline here is thinking carefully about what the counterfactuals are is not a technicality. That decides what policy lesson the trial can teach. I think I have to skip this, yeah. Actually, I won't. This is such an important, it's such an important slide. So, this is because we're in Norway, I really want to talk about this. So, it's been documented extensively that promising pilot programs don't always scale well. We talked about this earlier already. And I want to use Norway as a very useful contrast here to make this point. So I was super excited when I found this paper by Regge et al. 2024, published in the Journal of Human Resources. And they had a really similar, what I figured, very similar experience or experiment to ours. It was a smaller scale version of our RCTs with many similarities, but some important differences. So their main treatment also reorganizes 5-year-olds into same age groups to deliver a more structured curriculum. But their experiment provides more resources, better teacher training, and active monitoring for program fidelity. And these are features that don't often survive a large-scale national reform. And I think that is what explains the differences here. So they have persistent effects until first grade. So the effects of their experiment carry on for 2 years, and they see still the treatment group is ahead by the start of primary education. And I think it comes down to this scaling question. So they have much better, they kind of make sure that they are doing the best they can to achieve the good outcomes for the treatment children, but those might be the things that don't scale in a larger scale experiments. I think both kinds of experiments are needed, but they answer different questions. I'll skip this and then just close with 3 things to take home. First, you always need to ask, compared to what? The counterfactual always matters. Second, scale often changes answers, so representative trials are valuable. Large-scale representative national trials are valuable. And third, statistical power makes 0 results meaningful, something we can learn about, not disappointing. And finally, practically speaking, just run the experiment, and especially for reforms that are popular, because they might be disappointing when you actually bring them to data. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for 1 question before the coffee break. If there are any questions. Yes, please. And please just say your name and where you're from.
So, Lars Kirkeberg from Statistics Norway. Thanks for a great presentation. You started out by noting the political commitment to the experiment initially, and before you carried through the experiment. Was that commitment to the experiment still the case ex post when you had the results, or was there some kind of moving goalpost, redefining success criteria, etc., when you saw that you did not find the results that you were maybe looking for or hoping for?
If I understood the question correctly, so the commitment just meant that they will not do a national reform before our results, and they didn't, right? There is no national reform that's being done currently, but we won't see until this summer whether this reform stays in the political program for the parties. I'm not sure if yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you, Ramin. And now we have a 15-minute coffee break, which means that, or actually it's 12 minutes now, so we'll start again 11:15. For a very interesting panel debate where more of the controversies will be talked about.
slik så at det blir bakgrunnen også. Så står det der. Det blir veldig fint. Ja. Deilig nå. Bra, tenk på hemmelighet. Tenk på hemmelighet.
Nej, det var ikke sjovt.
opp dere. Nei. We're starting again in a minute. This is a Nordic meeting, so no Southern European time here. Though we've already disgraced the Nordic tradition by being a minute and a half too late. Det ikke en til I panelet? Jo, der ja. Okay, so welcome back from the coffee break to the people here, and welcome back from whatever you did to the people following us on stream. It's now time for the panel debate. Let me just introduce the panel, and you can give them an applause at the end. It's Oda Ingaard, who's a member of parliament for the Norwegian Green Party, Karen Ultveit Moe, head of the economics department at the University of Oslo, Thomas Eisensee, research director at the Swedish National Institute of Economic Research. It's Jukka Mattila, who's the director of that Institute for Economic Research, and Ragnar Bø Elgsås, deputy head of Department of Economic and Social Affairs in the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions, LO, Norway. So we'll try with the time we have. Yes. So we'll try with the time we have to get through three topics: the politics of this, the public perception, the ethics. Second, the design, the institutional capacity, which is mentioned in the report, and a very short round about the future. But let me start with you, Ragnar. LO, Fakke, has been very critical of this Norwegian tax research experiment. Why is that?
Well, there are several reasons for that. First one I would point out is the large economic costs. That is a high alternative value to use this money on other schemes.
2.5 milliarder Norwegian kroner.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of money, and we mean that you can use those money better. You can use them better on other ways to get people young people to get into the workforce, or maybe other ways to research. I mean, if you give 40 scientists 12 million kroner for a project, that's a normal Norwegian research project. That's the same amount of money, and you can of course ask the scientists, what will they choose? 40 projects at 12 million or one project at 500 million. So that's one of the main reasons. And then, of course, is it really a problem here that people don't have the incentive to work? We can see that there's quite a lot of young people that want to get into the workforce that can't do it right now, and that is probably the main problems. Not these schemes will probably not help that much.
Okay. Would you describe LO's opposition to this experiment as a more of a political stance, or does it have something to do? Are you critical towards randomized experiments like this in the public sector per se?
No, definitely not. So we are definitely pro research and also randomized research, but this project, we don't find that it shouldn't be the target because it's so expensive.
Okay. Oda, you're you're a freshman member of parliament, also an economist by background. So just to start us off, there might be a tension, as we saw in the Finnish preschool experiment, for example, a research, between the normal political logic, which is you go to the voters, they give you a mandate for something, and then you follow through. You need to show willpower and be able to do things. And this critical, research-based, slower approach, how would you, from a political perspective, balance those two?
Yeah, I think that
those two things oppose each other is maybe the least fun part of politics. I think you, Torbjørn, in the media now, being a politician, probably recognize also the media's role in this. Because as politicians, you're only talking about issues. Like, we could be talking about what do we want to achieve, right? The goals, and then research will always be the best way to kind of figure out how do we solve these goals. But it's most of the time required that you have a solution. And it's not good enough also to have a solution that is fact-based. It needs to be easy to understand. So it needs to be something that you can say in a sentence and people will understand it. So we've experienced this talking about other parts, not necessarily in terms of randomization project, but there is a vast knowledge about what will work and not when it comes to taxes or fees and all of those things. We want to give out the CO2 emission fees just as cash to people. It's widely recognized by economists that that's the best way to do it from that perspective. But we're being laughed at by journalists because it's so difficult to understand. So I think it's also really important to, if we want to have this type of research and want to go more into fact-based solutions in policy, to also recognize that it's so important to get math and statistics into school as a big and important thing, because it needs to be more understood by the general population also, what it means to do this type of research.
Before I ask Thomas a question and get the rest of the panel involved, but Oda, theoretically, would you be willing to scrap a policy for the Norwegian Green Party if it turned out that it didn't achieve its stated goals? A popular policy?
Yeah, so I try to make sure that whatever I am lobbying for inside the Green Party and outside is something that we can at least, it's not 100% done deal how we make it, right? Because I think there's also a part of this that is, you can have different types of solutions around the same policy, right? But I want to say yes. I'm not sure I would in reality.
Thomas, from the academic research side, these tensions between the logic of politics and the logic of the research community, how would you describe that?
Well, I think that it's well, from the research perspective, it's of course important to do these kind of randomized experiments. I mean, these kind of experiments, they inform us about the effects of different reforms, and in a way that is not feasible with other kinds of studies. But I think it's important to think about there's a fundamental tension in politics from a political perspective. There's often a real trade-off between acting now, immediately, to increase welfare based on the existing knowledge that you have, and on the other hand, wait for evidence which can be delayed. And I think this is the real problem here, that in many cases politics will, and probably should, prioritize the former, that is, act now. I mean, we have many examples of, you have increasing unemployment, you have rising prices, fiscal stress, that need, so politics needs to address those issues swiftly. And randomized experiments, by contrast, they take time. It takes time to implement. It takes time to legislate and to evaluate them properly. So even if everyone agrees that evidence is needed and that's the value of evidence, this intertemporal mismatch can be binding.
Karen, you haven't been in charge of or worked specifically with large-scale randomized experiments in Norway, but you have, to a very large extent, been on the policy, not advisory side, but being heading, for example, NOUs, I don't know, the expert groups that are trying to create this base of knowledge so that politicians can make good decisions. On the tension between the research academic side and the political side, how would you view that, and how would you view, for example, the big Norwegian tax experiment that's going on now?
Okay, I think it almost goes without saying that given how many expert commissions I have participated in, I do believe in them as a tool or then simply generating a good knowledge base for policy reforms. I really think that's utterly important. Then I think I should say that since I'm head of department of the economics department at University of Oslo, which hosts the tax center that is then responsible for the major tax experiment. So, and I'd like to say that I'm very proud of my colleagues and Simon and the guys at the Frisch Center who have set up this project. I think it's very impressive. But then I do so. The way I see this is that this is another the RCTs coming into economics and other social sciences is one more example of how we in social sciences have started to adopt methods from the natural sciences, from medicine. That's, I believe, can be very useful in certain areas. But I think I should say that I'm skeptical to a complete rollout in all, say, economic policy areas. And there's a couple of reasons why. So one of them is that, so when you do an experiment in medicine, it's voluntarily to participate. You can say yes or no. You don't have to be part. When you, for instance, do the tax experiment, it's not about saying yes or no. It's something that it's decided for you. So there are some principal differences between the two. And then I also think that, at least I think it's easier to do these experiments in, say, for instance, when you related to, say, education. And I think that one of the difficulties with the ongoing tax experiment is that the tax policy has some primary tasks, and they are not about getting people to work. That is more like a side effect. It's more about how we want the system to work. The major purpose of the tax system is not to be a labor market measure. The major purpose of the tax system is simply to then generate income that can fund public expenses. And I think, and I believe that's one of the reasons why we also had this quite an extensive debate in Norway about the tax experiment, because it's the experiment is using the tax system not to something that has to do with its primary purpose, but to then, in a way, exploiting one of the side effects.
Jukka, being in the institution that disappointed almost all Finnish politicians, that had decided on a big reform that, as we heard here, you torpedoed. How do you? That was a joke.
No.
How do you view the topic we're talking about, the tension between the academic research side and politics?
So if you don't mind, I'll wrap up a little what has been said here. First on the subject of voluntarily. I'm born 30th December 1985. That is in the end of the year. So I've involuntarily participated in the experiment of having put in the school at a very young age. And this has caused me, science has proven this, to receive poorer grades than my colleagues, and this is probably why I never became a professor in the first place. But my point is here that the entire society is one big involuntary experiment. So we're happy to subject people to these involuntary experiments without ever knowing their actual results. But then, when we question for methods that would prove their results scientifically, we find this unethical because someone gets to participate and someone doesn't, right? So there is nuance to this. But I think what was fundamental here is to kind of make the difference between what is a goal in politics and what is a tool in politics. So I would say income taxation can be both. Income taxation is something which is used to collect money for the state, but it can also be a tool for causing labor market effects. If you oppose it, as Ragnar here did, on the idea that we would think that the incentives are not a big deal and we would be better off doing something else, then what you're actually saying is that I know that the incentives are not a big deal and I know something else would be more efficient. But how do you know this if you haven't found it out with an experiment? This one is open, I think, for debate. So if we are looking for example, the most cost-efficient ways of getting young people employed in the labor market, then ex ante, I wouldn't be able to tell you whether a tax credit or a public employment services program would be better. The only way for us to find out would be to conduct careful research and compare these two tools for each other. On the other hand, we might have the sole purpose of simply giving these people services without the idea of it should lead to something positive in their lives or not, and then we can just give them services. Then giving services becomes the goal, not the employment. So you have to make the distinction between the goal and the tool, and then be very precise to compare the tools to reach different goals.
Karen?
Yes. So I think I'd like to emphasize that as a researcher, I think that it's great to use these experiments. I really think that they can advance, that I can in principle advance policymaking. But also as a researcher, and also with having the background from many of these expert commissions, where the idea has been to then put forward research inside to improve policymaking, I have realized that it's also very important to understand that policymaking is different from research, and policymaking is also about it's about people perceiving policy changes, policy as fair, as understandable. So there are other issues at stake, and which I think that we as researchers not always are that good at understanding. And for instance, I think that the fairness bit is very important. And again, I'd like to make the comparison with medicine. So when you do clinical experiments, then when you then split, when you have the treatment group and the control group, it's not clear up front which group is better off, because we know that a drug may have a positive effect or it may have a negative effect. So there is it's not such that one group has only an upside and one group has only an upside. That's the downside, and upside is distributed completely differently. But with, say, the tax experiment, it's very clear that the group that gets, that the upside here is concentrated in the group that gets the tax deduction. And so there are some differences, and I think we need to acknowledge them also in our communication.
Ragnar, then Oda.
Well, you say that we should try. We don't know the results yet, so we cannot judge before we know it. But what we know is how much money this costs, and we know what other things cost. And if you have a list of you have to prioritize in politics. You have to see what will we try first. And we talk here about these expert committees. There was a Norwegian expert committee that in 2021 was it was named competence, activity, and income security, and how to get more, with the emphasis on how to get more people under 30 years to be part of the workforce. And tax income credit wasn't named at one of their ideas, but there are lots of other things they want to do. And lots of all these things they wanted to do are underfunded or haven't got enough money from the state yet. So this is about prioritizing, and is this the right tool now? And is this the best way to use 500 million for research? Could it be a better research project? I don't know. Maybe you don't. But I think that's obviously open for debate. And in that perspective, I think it's quite reasonable to question if this is a wise way to use this money now. Ola?
Yeah, so I think there are many good points in this panel. And the fairness, obviously, is something that I also find challenging in the tax experiment. I spoke to someone at Statistics Norway last week, because they've deployed this tool where you can get support if you make smaller policy changes to actually do randomized tests. And some of the examples I've heard there were, okay, from education, for example, where it's not so easy. Maybe early school start, that's quite defined now, that might be not a good idea, but many of the smaller things can be very beneficial to actually do a randomized test on, and it won't be perceived as unfair necessarily. And I think the Finnish example is very interesting in that regard. And there's also another thing that I find very interesting about that is how that research project has managed to go across 2 different governments. And I think one of the key parts of that is to understand that, okay, there's one government who will start this experiment, and that government maybe have higher labor market attendance as their primary goal. But you also need to design that experiment so that also the next government, which might have completely other goals, also find that experiment useful and relevant, because then it becomes much more easier as a politician to also listen to that result and feel like that is actually designed to find more universal truths, if there are any of those, and also adjust. And that's also why I maybe was like, will I change policy based on research? Because from the Green Party, we are quite radical in how we look at the world, right? So a lot of the research will maybe look at the world as it is, and okay, we will drive more cars, we will emit more emissions, and then the result will be based on that. And so I think that's very important in designing this research, is that consider that there might be other targets and other goals that needs to be taken into account to have a good or a higher probability that politicians from different parties will actually look at the results and think this is actually relevant.
Jukka, you haven't asked for a rebuttal, but I'll give you one. Since you started this very exciting round.
On which point do you want to rebuttal?
No, all of it.
Okay, so I started Ragnar, okay? So yeah, we know the cost of this experiment, and then possibly we know some of the costs of something that has been proposed in some expert committee. I was in the Ministry of Finance for a good 10 years and not, so I've been in a few expert committees. But the problem is that we do know the cost is easy to calculate, but we don't know the benefit. And what is feasible is the most cost-efficient way. And until we know also the benefits of different ideas, then we can't measure cost efficiency. So it's still a moot argument. I do see the point in the fairness, but I think this is something where we have to have a very careful discussion and not a superficial one. Because certainly in the world of limited resources, we have to tax some people and we have to give services to some people, and we hope to achieve some results with this combination. So what is the state of things is the state of things, and people often do perceive changes in the states of things as unfair, and then they take the original state of affairs as fair and just, even if it might be just a result of long path dependencies. So I would like to question the concept of fairness. Is it fair to give services the effects and benefits of which we don't know just because we've given them for 20 or 30 years? Or is it more fair to actually evaluate the benefits of those programs, even if it might cost a little bit of money.
Before I'd like to continue this round, but just one question, Jukka. Do you think there's a selection bias from the political side when it comes to which major experiments you want to conduct or not? Of course, says Ragnar on the side here.
Yeah, well, I think you might be careful throwing your ideological dog under the bus. As you said, if you have a really lofty ideological goal, which, let's say, some people will say that reducing taxation is a good effort for improving employment. But the actual ideological aim behind this might be just that you don't like taxation. The labor market effects is just a nice package you wrap it under. So in this case, don't experiment it because you might spoil your own party. So definitely politicians have different incentives, and even bureaucrats have their own incentives. And researchers, of course, have incentives to do everything that has to do with randomized controlled trials because they yield good publications. So it's a difficult subject.
Thomas, let me just ask you about that, because from the research side, the moment that you want to take both of these, even though the Norwegian tax experiment is more costly than the preschool experiment, I think, but still these are big political priorities. They might cost you political capital in the public debate as well. So from the research side, when you want to get funding, you want to get, it's sort of a political victory to get funding for experiments like this and political support. Does it mean that you have to get your hands dirty? Do you have to become political in a way as a research facility?
No, I think researchers should do what they do best. I mean, they should conduct their experiments according to best practice. But of course, it is often, I think you can distinguish between big experiments and small experiments. In bigger experiments, you probably need to also have sort of a political feeling about things. And if you don't have that feeling yourself, you should definitely team up with somebody who is good at communicating, understanding distributional issues and other things that are important. And I mean, this is particularly important in big experiments like the one conducted in Norway with the tax credit. So I think that's important.
Before we move on to design institutional capacity, Oda, since you're the politician here in the panel, if in theory we say that you could always find out which policy is more or less cost effective or works as envisioned, in an experimental state like that, is there room for political values, ideology, saying that I don't care if it's cost effective, I still want to do it because it's the right thing to do?
So I think that is my point on making sure that you measure enough of the effects. So during my bachelor's, I wrote my bachelor's on sick pay, and there's been several studies on sick pay, and I think I'm fairly certain they're randomized in terms of what counties in Sweden that were given so these days with no sick pay. So the effects there are very clear. Stop giving out sick pay and people will go to work. But the problem with all those studies is that it doesn't say anything about what groups will then not go to work or go to work even though they might be sick. It doesn't say anything about their long-term health or other types of effects. And of course, it's very difficult to design, and I think Simon was onto this on the tax part also. It's maybe completely impossible to design these projects to encompass everything in this world, but at least being more, having that more top of mind, that there are actually different targets. So some will value high labor participation much more than the fact that certain groups in society will get much worse off. And that is a very relevant point.
Karen, Thomas and Jukka, if we go to the design, doesn't mean to just, if any of you want to take this question, what are the fundamentals for good research design in large scale experiments? And perhaps more interesting, what are the pitfalls? What are the potential pitfalls here? Jukka?
I can take the previous question if you don't mind.
You'll take the previous question. Okay.
So, I actually think that
you're an anarchist, but I accept it.
I actually think that more information will bring more room in the political debate for the actual questions of ideology and value. Because then we don't have to be arguing with Ragnar on whether the incentives matter or not, because we know how much they matter. And then we can say that, okay, we know this and this about the incentives. And this is our idea of how things should work. Take, for example, the Finnish basic income experiment. It was supposed to bring Eden on Earth. I swear you, everyone's supposed to be working full time since it liberates people. Nothing happened, okay. So it's been very quiet on the front of basic income liberating people to do more work in Finland in the recent years. So you can still support basic income out of principle. It brings people comfort, it brings people certainty, and these are important values. But it brings the political discussion to these important values which you spoke of when you mentioned sick leave. But there's trade-offs. But if you don't know these trade-offs, then we are discussing the wrong things. When we do know these trade-offs, we can discuss the underlying values.
But Jukka, if to lead you back to my question, because if there is a large-scale experiment where there's no debate afterwards about the validity of the results, or at least maybe not the validity, but at least the research design and how much that potentially has influenced the results, I want to see it because I've never seen it before. It's like a unicorn. So the research, it won't happen. So the research design in itself can be very critical. Even though it's very good, it always has its potential pitfalls. So what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think there's like a silver bullet. Every experiment is an individual which exists in the institutional context it is given. Ramin had an absolutely fabulous comparison between the Norwegian and the Finnish preschool experiment which you saw. But to answer your actual question, the unicorn won't happen. But I don't think we should be discussing on whether we have information of absolute certainty or information of no certainty, but we should struggle to have as good information as feasible. And at some point, of course, you face a trade-off with the costs of obtaining the information and the quality of the information, and you have to make kind of a decision there. But again, it becomes then more a question of values and priorities than a question of what we should do. It's not to say we shouldn't experiment, but how much we invest to get how good a quality of knowledge.
Thomas, in the Swedish contribution here about labor market politics, it says, a key finding is that research design alone is not sufficient. Successful experimentation depends heavily on institutional capacity within public employment services. So institutional capacity is a key phrase here.
Exactly. So you need agencies to take ownership of the experiments in order for the experiments to be successful. And I think this is key. So you need a good cooperation, and I think the experiments done by Ramin and the others also in the volume shows exactly that. You need good cooperation between researchers and policymakers and the public agencies. Otherwise, you cannot rely on the results, and the external validity is damaged by it. So I think that's key.
Can we open up for if there are any questions from? If there are any of you who have questions, we can open up for that as well. So just wave your hand. Don't scream. Karen og Ragnar.
Yes, I'd just like to add to that. I do believe that the point about institutional capacity is very important. So I've been involved in a smaller RCT myself, related to a very limited policy area, and that's kind of what I brought along from it, took along from it, that you need institutional capacity and you need resources to make sure that the people who are actually handling the experiment then understand what they are working on, and you need very good communication between the researchers and the institutions in charge. And that's one of the things where I'm very impressed with the tax experiment, where it's very much my impression that that's one of the things that has been achieved, that there has been a very close cooperation between the researchers, the ministry, and the tax authority. And I think that that's key in order to have any success at all.
Ragnar?
To the pitfalls, if we go to the Norwegian experiment, I think that's what Simon here said earlier is very important, because the main pitfall is probably that if you scale it up to everybody, will there be more jobs? On the macro side, is it possible for everybody to work more if everybody wants to work more, or what will happen then? And that brings me back to my original point that it's in Norway now, it's not obviously not the incentives that is the most striking thing you see. Is all those young people that don't get the job that they want to have. They have all the incentives in the world, and they say they have the incentives, but they don't get the job that they want to do. So I think that's the main pitfall here in this experiment, that you can get the results you get, but if you scale it up, what will happen then? And you say, we don't know, and that will probably be one of the main problems here.
Question or short comment? Name and institutional affiliate.
One thing striking me is that an important element being absent from the discussion is the alternative costs of not finding out that certain policies are not working. And particularly to LO, have you considered that if you are convinced that earned tax credits doesn't work, you may risk, nevertheless, to get another government implementing it with the cost of which is manifold in terms of lost tax revenues for better services that you are supporting. So you may have chosen the wrong track concerning this experiment. Thank you.
Thank you. And FAFO is a research institute closely connected with the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions, LO, but as we hear, utterly independent in their views. Ragnar?
Yes, that's an interesting argument. I don't think that these experiments will change how the politicians in Norway will think about tax in the main scale. I think that the Conservatives will still say that the tax rate should be lower, or maybe much lower, and on the left wing, they will probably say that we have so many other things we want to use our money on that we cannot lower the tax rates. And then, I think if you look at the political side of it, if the Conservatives win the next election, they will maybe follow up their proposal that they had the last year, or their government, with a much larger or much broader tax credit scheme. As we've seen in Sweden, and I don't think that having this experiment showing that it doesn't work will stop them from doing it. They will probably do it anyway.
Thomas and Oda, we have 6 minutes left.
Okay, I just want to. I think it's a good point that the gentleman made. And I just also want to address something that Ragnar said earlier. That it's. I totally agree that you need, when you do experiments, you need to consider the alternatives and the alternative costs. So look at other experiments and compare which are the experiments that you actually want to do. But I also think it's important to look at, to consider that it is very large amounts that go into these reforms, income tax credit. And you could take the Swedish example. It was implemented in Sweden in 2007, and there has been successive schemes implemented. So it's a huge amount of resources that go into these. And well, we've done our best to understand the effects of that. We have used simulation models. We have try to estimate those simulation models and to consider what are the actual effects on labor supply. So we've done very much work to actually understand the effects, but we don't actually know because we don't have a good control group. And this is what you actually get when you do these kind of experiments. I mean, had we known that 2007 that we could do that, then we might have actually pursued that. But again, it's politics is about doing things here and now. And
Oda?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment directly on the tax project, but I do think, or it's slightly, but it's very focused on the individual, right? And I think that is maybe the main concern for me, is that we're so focused on the individual effects in much of the research, and that's what's easiest to measure also. But what if the reason why young people in Norway don't work is because the type of work they get is considered too low standard? Or any other type of psychological effects. And it can also be, if it has something to do with, does everybody in my group talk about the tax rate and if it's beneficial to work or not, and how does that affect me? And that is maybe my biggest concern with some of these projects that are quite big. So it's maybe easier to do smaller randomized tests, because the societal effects are also super important when we talk about some of the things we want to achieve. But I do think that research can give tremendous important information and input going into policy design. And that is also worth considering. So how to design it and how to give that knowledge out is, of course, important, but it's not going to be that silver bullet giving us all the knowledge.
We'll end with a couple of minutes, and I literally mean a couple of minutes, with two very short answers from all of you. A, should there be more RCTs, randomized controlled trial experiments? And B, will there be? You have about 20 seconds each, starting with Ragnar.
I would say maybe and maybe. That depends.
Okay. Please.
I think should, but we are looking at very ambitious, very high-scale experiments right now. In this event. What we are not talking about that much is small-scale experiments in, for example, delivering the public services we provide. I think the frontier should be there.
Thomas?
I think that should be if it's given, but it's not given that there should be, but it's not necessarily the case that it should be implemented per se. I mean, it's important that it's connected to the political process. That's why.
Karen?
I think there should be, but I don't think that we should think that we can solve all economic policy questions with RCTs.
Ola?
Yes, I think there should be more, but targeted and smaller. And I also think the timing thing that we were discussing is important. So maybe as part of these NOUs or the public, so that we don't lose the time, because that is also a very important point that was said. We want to achieve results, so can we do it in parallel?
Okay, thank you. And hold your applause for the panel until after I say thank you to the Minister, the Secretary General, everybody who joined us online, and to everybody here in the room. This report is available here physically. You can also download it. And the work on the next edition of the report, 2027, has started. So you could also follow for updates on the next launch event in 2027. Thank you for the panel, and have a good day. To the panel.
Sendingen produsert av Departementenes digitaliseringsorganisasjon.